I still remember the exact geometry of the scent. It wasn't just a smell, it was a physical weight in the air. I expected the sharp, aggressive sting of synthetic musk, the kind that burns the back of your throat and announces your presence in a locker room before you even speak. Instead, what hit my skin was cold, then strangely, terrifyingly warm. It smelled like cedar trying to strangle a garden of heavy, wet orchids. I stood there, towel around my waist, thinking I was putting on armor. I didn't know I was stripping it away. My life before that morning was a masterpiece of structural engineering, built entirely to hide the soft thing living inside it. I constructed my days out of heavy weights and silence. I went to the gym 6 days a week, pushing iron until my arms shook, not because I wanted the bulk, but because the soreness gave me a reason to grimace that wasn't related to the ache in my chest. I wore flannel shirts that were stiff with starch, drowning out the shape of a body I didn't know how to inhabit. It was a performance, exhaustive and constant, a daily act of burying myself under layers of calculated roughness. But every fortress has a crack. Mine was a cardboard box shoved behind a stack of winter boots in the back of my closet. It was the only place in the apartment where I actually existed. Inside, there wasn't anything scandalous to the outside world, just soft things. A silk camisole I'd bought online at 3 a.m., a pair of sheer stockings that felt like water against my fingertips, a tube of lip gloss that smelled like vanilla. I never wore them out. I barely wore them in. Just knowing they were there, breathing in the dark, was enough to keep the panic at bay. They were the secret frequency I tuned into when the noise of being a guy got too loud. Living with Liam made the performance non-negotiable. Liam was a good guy, the kind who communicated in grunts and fist bumps, who left pizza boxes on the counter and assumed everyone watched football on Sundays. He was harmless, but his casual, unobservant presence meant I had to be vigilant. I couldn't leave the bathroom door unlocked. I couldn't let my soft laundry get mixed in with his. And I absolutely had to smell like a man. We had an unspoken arms race of body sprays, cans of Arctic Force and Obsidian Steel lined up on the bathroom shelf like little tin soldiers guarding our fragile masculinity. That Tuesday, the soldiers failed me. I shook my can of graphite and felt the hollow rattle of emptiness. Nothing. I checked the backup can. Empty. Panic is a cold thing, isn't it? I had 5 minutes before I had to leave for work, and I couldn't walk out smelling like the lavender soap I secretly used. I needed the mask. I saw Liam's new bottle on the edge of the sink. It looked different. Sleek, matte black, with foreign text I couldn't read, and a small silver sticker that just said, Tester, Project V. Liam was always ordering weird supplements and gadgets from overseas. I figured this was just some potent pheromone spray he was trying out. I didn't think. I just grabbed it. I sprayed it liberally across my chest and neck. The hiss was quieter than usual, more of a whisper than a jet. The mist hit my skin and didn't evaporate. It sat there, oily and heavy. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't the chemical punch of graphite. It started with a top note of something sharp, almost metallic, but beneath it, the floor dropped out. It was jasmine. Thick, cloying, undeniable jasmine, wrapped in something that smelled like skin musk and rain. It was intoxicating and completely, utterly wrong for the character I was playing. I tried to wipe it off with a towel, scrubbing until my skin turned red, but the scent didn't lift. It sank. It felt like the oil was burrowing into my pores, seeking something deep inside to latch onto. I pulled on my undershirt, my button-down, my tie, layering fabric over the mistake, hoping to smother it. But as I walked out the door, I could feel it radiating off me, a silent alarm bell ringing in a frequency only I could hear. The scent didn't fade like it was supposed to. It clung to the skin like a second layer. The first week wasn't a transformation. It was a haunting. It started with the textures. My skin, usually numb to the rough canvas of my work pants and the starch of my collars, suddenly woke up. It was as if the nerve endings had multiplied overnight, rising to the surface like divers seeking air. I remember sitting at my desk on Thursday, 3 days after the spray, shifting in my chair because the denim of my jeans felt like sandpaper. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was loud. Every movement sent a scratchy, static signal to my brain that said, wrong. I found myself rubbing my forearms, expecting to feel a rash or a sunburn, but there was nothing there. Just skin that looked a little too pale, a little too soft for the friction it was being subjected to. Then came the emotional thinning. That's the only way I can describe it. My internal world, usually a fortress of stone and silence, began to turn into glass. I was driving home, listening to the same radio station I always listened to, classic rock, safe and predictable. But then a commercial came on, some stupid jingle about buying insurance for your family, and I felt my throat close up. A hot, prickly pressure built behind my eyes. I had to pull over into a gas station parking lot because the tears were blurring the road. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, baffled by my own biology. I wasn't sad. I wasn't happy. I was just porous. The world was getting in. The way the sunset hit the oil stains on the asphalt looked devastatingly beautiful. I felt ridiculous, wiping my eyes with the back of a hand that felt lighter than I remembered. The gym became a landscape of confusion. I went through the motions, bench press, squats, but the aggression was gone. Usually, I pushed the weight to silence the noise in my head. Now the exertion felt foreign. And the smell. That was the thing I couldn't scrub away. After 40 minutes of cardio, I should have smelled like stale sweat and the metallic tang of effort. Instead, when I wiped my forehead, the scent that came off me was sweet. Not the cloying jasmine of the spray, but something deeper. It smelled like warm milk and vanilla, a soft, biological sweetness that had no business coming out of my pores. I looked around the locker room, paranoid that the other guys could smell it, that they would turn and see the intruder in their midst. But they just kept talking about the game, oblivious, while I stood there feeling like a spy who had forgotten the code. I tried to rationalize it. The human brain is excellent at building cages for things it doesn't want to understand. I told myself it was the diet. Maybe I was eating too much soy? Maybe it was stress. I spent hours on WebMD looking for sudden skin sensitivity. But late at night, lying in bed with the sheets feeling impossibly heavy against my legs, I knew those were lies. Because beneath the confusion, beneath the fear of being found out, there was a hum. A quiet, terrifying vibration in the center of my chest that felt like permission. It felt like the body I was in was finally listening to the language I'd been speaking in my head for years. It was a secret thrill, sharp and dangerous. The feeling of exposure peaked on Monday morning. We had a team meeting, the kind where everyone postures to prove they're the smartest person in the room. I stood up to present my quarterly figures. Usually I could lower my voice, broaden my shoulders, and play the part. But as I stood there, I felt transparent. I caught my reflection in the conference room window. The posture was right, the suit was right, but the person inside it felt fluid, contained only by the tension of the moment. I stumbled over my words. My voice felt too resonant, too harsh. I wanted to apologize, not for the numbers, but for the deception of my existence. I rushed home that night, desperate to reset. I locked the bathroom door and turned the shower to scalding, needing the heat to burn away the softness. I grabbed the rough loofah and scrubbed, hard. I wanted to find the old skin, the thick, insensitive hide that kept me safe. I tried to scrub the feeling away in the shower, but the water just beaded off skin that felt impossibly smooth. The escalation wasn't gradual anymore. It was a landslide. By the middle of the second week, the simple logistics of getting dressed had become a minefield. The tenderness in my chest had evolved from a vague sensitivity into a constant bruising ache. It felt like I was carrying a secret weight right beneath the skin, something fragile and swollen that resented being contained. Putting on my standard white work shirt was no longer a routine. It was an ordeal. The starched cotton, which I used to rely on for its crisp professional armor, now felt like sandpaper dragging across a sunburn. I found myself wincing as I buttoned it up, having to hunch my shoulders forward just to create a pocket of air between the fabric and my skin. I started wearing a soft undershirt, then two, trying to build a buffer zone, but the pressure remained, a persistent, throbbing reminder that the geography of my body was rewriting itself without my consent. The undeniable proof, however, didn't come from the pain. It came from the silence of the mirror. I remember it was a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after the spray incident. I reached for my safe trousers, the navy blue wool slacks I wore for client meetings. They were expensive, tailored, and reliable. I stepped into them, expecting the familiar, loose drape around the legs. Instead, the fabric caught. I tugged them up, and they resisted. At first, I thought they had shrunk in the wash, but as I pulled them over my hips, the reality settled in. They weren't just tight, they were being reshaped. The fabric strained across my hips and thighs, pulling taut in a way that men's pants simply aren't cut to do. But when I finally managed to fasten the button, the waist gaped open at the back. I stood there, staring at my reflection, seeing the silhouette of a stranger. My waist had tapered in and my hips had flared out, creating a curve that the straight lines of the wool couldn't hide. It wasn't a fluctuation. It was a completely different architecture. I didn't finish dressing. I left the pants unbuttoned and walked, barefoot and trembling, back to the bathroom. The black bottle was still there on the shelf, looking innocent and sleek. Liam was gone for the weekend, so I didn't have to hide my investigation. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have, cold against my palm. I turned it over, ignoring the sleek branding on the front, and focused on the silver sticker on the bottom. I had glanced at it before, but I hadn't read it. Not really. I grabbed a pair of tweezers from the cabinet and picked at the corner of the tester label. It peeled back with a wet, tearing sound, revealing the manufacturer's label underneath. The text was small, clinical, and devastating. It didn't list fragrance notes or alcohol content. It listed chemical compounds: estradiol valerate, spironolactone, nanoparticle transdermal carrier system, and then, in bold red text, experimental, high-potency feminizing agent, irreversible after 10 doses. I had used it every day for 14 days. I didn't drop the bottle. I didn't scream. I just set it down, very carefully, on the porcelain sink. The silence in the apartment was absolute. I remember looking at my hands, half expecting them to dissolve, but they just looked softer. the veins less prominent, the skin glowing with that strange, impossible smoothness. The realization didn't hit me like an explosion. It settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, sinking quiet. The chemistry wasn't just at work. It had already won. I was a walking biological experiment, and the control group was gone. I went to my laptop, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick as I typed in the product code from the bottle. The search results were a flood of underground forums and gray market pharmaceutical sites. Project Venus, they called it. A radical body modification compound designed for rapid, permanent transition without the need for needles or pills. I scrolled through pages of user logs, looking for a reversal, an antidote, a way to hit undo. But every thread ended the same way. The receptor binding is permanent. The tissue growth is real. There is no going back. I shut the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my face. The softer jawline, the eyes that looked wider, wetter. I should have been hyperventilating. I should have been calling 911. But as I sat there in the dim light of the living room, the panic that flared in my gut hit a wall of something else. It was a hum, low and steady, rising from that new, tender place in my chest. The panic should have been overwhelming, but under it, there was a hum of something that felt like relief. The silence in the bedroom was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own breathing, which felt too shallow, too fast. My work clothes lay in a heap on the floor. The stiff wool trousers that refused to button, the shirt that pulled too tight across a chest that shouldn't exist. I stood there in my boxers, feeling exposed. The air in the room felt too cold against skin that had become a stranger to me. I looked at the closet door. The boots were still there, guarding the cardboard box. For years, that box had been a containment unit for a desire I couldn't name. A place where I hid the pieces of myself that didn't fit the blueprint. But now, staring at the wreckage of my masculine wardrobe, I realized it wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was the only supply drop I had left. I pulled the box out. My hands were shaking, not with the frantic energy of the discovery in the bathroom, but with a slow, deliberate tremor. I lifted the lid. The scent of vanilla and stored fabric drifted up, a stark contrast to the aggressive metallic smell of the gym bag I used to live out of. I reached in and pulled out the silk slip I had bought 2 years ago. I remembered the night I bought it. I had been drunk, terrified, clicking purchase with a sense of doom. I had tried it on once, hated the way it hung on my square frame like a mockery, and buried it. I stepped into it now. The difference was immediate. Before, the silk had felt like a costume, a flimsy thing draped over a mannequin made of wood and angles. Now, it slid up my legs like water seeking its own level. It didn't catch on my knees. It didn't pull across my hips. It settled. The fabric found the new curve of my waist and rested there, heavy and cool. I pulled the straps up over my shoulders. There was no pinching. The silk cups, which had once been empty pockets of wishful thinking, were filled. The ache in my chest, that constant bruising tenderness, suddenly eased as the soft fabric cradled the new weight. It wasn't tight. It was holding me. I walked to the full-length mirror on the back of the door. I kept my eyes closed until I was standing directly in front of it. I was afraid to look. I was afraid I would see a caricature, a joke. I took a breath, smelling that phantom jasmine scent that seemed to be part of my blood now, and opened my eyes. The person staring back wasn't James, but she wasn't a stranger either. That was the most terrifying part. The heavy jawline I had hated was gone, softened by a layer of subcutaneous fat that the hormones had redistributed. My skin, usually rough with stubble by this time of day, was smooth and pale. But it was the eyes that stopped me. They looked huge. The harsh ridge of my brow had softened, opening up my face, making me look younger, vulnerable, and undeniably female. I turned to the side. The slip clung to a body that made geometric sense. The curve of the spine flowed into the flare of the hips. It wasn't a disguise. The suit I had worn to work that morning, that was the disguise. This was just anatomy. The internal narrative shifted. For the last 2 weeks, the question hammering in my brain had been, how do I stop this? But looking at the reflection, seeing the way the light caught the curve of a shoulder that looked so impossibly delicate, the question dissolved. A new one took its place, rising up from that warm hum in my chest. Why does this feel like waking up? It was a seduction. The panic of the accident was being eroded by the euphoria of the result. I touched my face, my fingers tracing the new softness of my cheek. I felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness over this person in the mirror. I didn't want to scrub her away anymore. I wanted to know her. But then the door to the apartment building slammed downstairs and the spell broke. The reality of the in-between crashed back in. I wasn't just a woman in a mirror. I was a man with a roommate who would be home in 2 days. I was an employee with a presentation due on Friday. I was living in a body that was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. How long could I hide this? The baggy sweatshirts were already suspicious. The way I walked, shorter strides to accommodate the shift in my center of gravity, was drawing looks. I stripped off the slip, moving quickly now, driven by a new kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of the change. It was the fear of being seen before I was ready. I shoved the silk back into the box, but it felt wrong to hide it now. It felt like burying a living thing. I put on my sweatpants, tying the drawstring tight until it dug into my soft waist, trying to manufacture the feeling of the old armor. But it didn't work. The sensation of the silk ghosted over my skin. I couldn't keep this contained in the bedroom anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in on a truth that needed air. I couldn't carry the weight of the silence alone anymore. It was heavier than the iron I used to push at the gym, a density that sat right in the center of my chest, pressing against the new tenderness there. I needed an anchor. I needed someone who could look at the wreckage of my masculinity and tell me if I was destroyed or if I was finally under construction. I chose Chloe. I had to. She was the only person in my life who didn't treat conversation like a transactional exchange. She listened with her whole body, with a stillness that made the truth feel possible. I texted her. I need to talk. It's weird. Please be home. And drove to her apartment. The drive was a blur of neon lights smearing against the rain on the windshield. I remember looking at my hands on the steering wheel. In the intermittent flashes of the street lamps, they looked foreign, slender, pale, the knuckles smooth and devoid of the hair that used to be there. I kept waiting for them to turn back into James's hands, to regain their roughness, but they just gripped the leather with a new, terrifying delicacy. The seatbelt felt different across my chest, pressing against sensitive tissue that shouldn't have been there. I felt like a volatile chemical reaction contained in a Honda Civic, waiting for a spark. Her apartment smelled like sage and old paper, a dry, grounding scent that usually calmed me down. Today, it felt like a high-stakes courtroom. I sat on her velvet sofa, my knees pressed together. A reflex I hadn't consciously learned, but simply had now. The posture felt protective, feminine, and completely involuntary. Chloe sat opposite me, holding a mug of tea, her eyes scanning my face with a precision that made me want to pull the hood of my sweatshirt up over my eyes. But I couldn't hide. The baggy fabric felt like a lie I was too exhausted to keep telling. "You look," she started, then stopped. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in assessment. "You look different, Jay. Luminous. Soft." The word hung in the air between us. Soft. It was the accusation and the absolution, all at once. "It's not just a look," I whispered. My voice cracked. It was higher, lighter, lacking the gravel I used to force into the bottom of my throat. "I messed up, Chloe. I used something. A spray. It changed me." I told her everything. The words tumbled out in a chaotic stream. The empty bottle of graphite, the theft of the black canister, the smell of jasmine that wouldn't leave, that seemed to be emanating from my marrow. The way my skin rejected denim. The way the mirror showed me a stranger who felt like a sister I'd swallowed. I waited for her to laugh. I waited for the inevitable recoil, for her to call a doctor or tell me to snap out of it. She didn't laugh. She set her tea down on the coaster, the ceramic clicking against the cork, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Past the panic and the oversized hoodie. "You think this is an accident," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "It was an accident," I insisted, but even as I said it, the words felt thin, transparent. "I didn't know what was in the bottle. I just wanted to smell like a man." "Maybe," she said, leaning forward. "But Jay, I've known you for 10 years. You've always been guarded, like you were protecting something fragile inside a concrete bunker. Maybe the bottle didn't change you. Maybe it just unlocked the door." She reached out and took my hand. Her palm was warm, dry. She didn't pull away when she felt the unnatural softness of my skin. She didn't flinch at the lack of calluses. She turned my hand over, tracing the new, delicate line of my wrist with her thumb. "You don't look like a guy who made a mistake," she said softly, her eyes locking onto mine. "You look like a woman who's been holding her breath for a decade." The air in the room shifted. The tension that had been strangling me for weeks suddenly snapped. I started to cry, not the angry, confused tears of the car ride, but a deep, racking release that shook my shoulders. Chloe moved then. She didn't just sit there. She got up, walked to her bedroom, and came back with a small silver makeup bag. She sat back down and unzipped it, the sound sharp and decisive. "If you're going to be her," she said, pulling out a tube of lip gloss, "you should stop hiding her in that hoodie." She opened a compact mirror and held it up. "Look at yourself. Not as James, as whoever is in there." I looked. The face in the small circle was tear-streaked and frightened, but it was undeniable. The features were open, soft, waiting. "I don't have a name for her yet," I whispered. "That's okay," Chloe said, applying a swipe of gloss to my lips. A simple, terrifyingly intimate act that sealed the reality of the moment. It felt cool, sticky, and right. It was a texture I had denied myself for years, and feeling it now, in the safety of her living room, felt like the first deep breath I'd taken since the spray hit my skin. "We'll find one." With her witnessing me, the fear lost its teeth. It wasn't a secret shame anymore. It was just a fact. Stepping out of the sanctuary of Chloe's living room felt like walking off a cliff. But instead of falling, I found the air held me. The body spray had done its work. The timeline for hiding had expired because there was nothing left of James to hide behind. I stepped onto the sidewalk, not in the suffocating layers of my old life, but in clothes Chloe had lent me. A simple trench coat over a soft sweater and jeans that actually fit the new geometry of my hips. The wind felt different. It wasn't an adversary anymore. It was a conversation. I felt it rush past my ears, no longer blocked by the tension in my jaw. I walked toward the coffee shop on the corner, the sound of my boots clicking a rhythm that felt dangerously, wonderfully distinct. The late afternoon sun hit the pavement, turning the gray concrete into something gold and luminous, matching the strange, quiet joy rising in my chest. I waited for the world to stop. I waited for the pointing fingers, the laughter, the aggressive confusion of men who felt tricked. But the strangers passing by didn't recoil. They just glanced. A man in a suit held the door open for me, his eyes sliding over me without a snag. It wasn't the hostility I had prepared for. It was a polite, indifferent acceptance that shook me more than a shout would have. I realized then that the performance of gender I had been so terrified of failing was already over. My body, reshaped by that accidental chemistry, was speaking for itself. Inside, the smell of roasted beans replaced the phantom jasmine for a moment. I stepped up to the counter. The barista, a tired girl with purple hair, didn't look up immediately. "What can I get for you?" she asked, tapping the screen. I opened my mouth to speak, my throat tightening with the old reflex to pitch my voice down, to growl. But I let it go. I let the new, lighter resonance sit in my throat. "Oat milk latte, please," I said. She looked up then. She didn't squint. She didn't pause. "Sure thing, miss. That'll be $5.50. Miss. The word landed like a physical touch. It wasn't a performance I had tricked her into. It was simply what she saw. The relief was a physical weight sliding off my shoulders. I didn't have to hold up the sky anymore. The real test, however, was waiting back at the apartment. Liam was home. I could hear the TV blaring as I unlocked the door. I walked in, the scent of the spray, my scent now, filling the hallway. He looked up from the couch, a beer in his hand, and froze. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at the changes. The hair I had styled, the softness of my face, the undeniable curve of my body under the coat. Then he looked at the black bottle on the shelf, which I had left out in the open. "You used it," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a flat, stunned observation. "I thought it was body spray," I said. My voice was steady. "It was a prototype," he muttered, looking away, looking guilty. I didn't think it would work that fast." The silence stretched, heavy and awkward, between the old life and the new. I should have been furious. I should have screamed at him for leaving an experimental biological agent next to the toothpaste. But looking at him, slumped, scruffy, trapped in the rigid box of masculinity I had just escaped, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound disconnection. The accident of the spray mattered less than the person standing in the kitchen. "It worked," I said simply. "And I'm keeping the clothes." He moved out 2 days later. It was a quiet exit. He couldn't look at me, not because I was a monster, but because I was a mirror he wasn't ready to face. The anger at the accident had evaporated, leaving only a strange gratitude for the chemical push I hadn't known I needed. It's been 6 months since the black canister of Project V went into the hazardous waste bin at the clinic, but the momentum it started hasn't slowed down. It's just become mine. The morning routine is no longer a frantic act of camouflage. I wake up, and the sunlight hitting the duvet covers legs that are smooth, not because of a chemical accident, but because I spent 20 minutes in the bath with a razor and a lavender scrub I bought openly. The nightstand doesn't hold secrets anymore. There's a blister pack of teal pills sitting next to a glass of water, prescribed, monitored, chosen. The spray was the breach, the violent kick that knocked the door down, but these daily choices? These are the bricks I'm using to build the house properly. The apartment breathes differently now. Without Liam's heavy, unspoken judgment filling the corners, the space has expanded to fit the person living in it. I filled the empty shelves with things that have texture: ceramic vases, soft throws, books that aren't about war or finance. My closet is no longer a war zone between the work clothes and the secret box. It's just a wardrobe. Soft knits hang next to structured blazers. Floral prints brush against the denim that used to terrify me, but now hugs curves that make sense. The silk slip isn't hidden in a box anymore. It hangs right there in the center, catching the light. Getting dressed is a ritual of celebration. I remember zipping up a pencil skirt last Tuesday, feeling the fabric glide over hips that have settled into their new width, and realizing that the constant background noise of discomfort, the static that used to plague every minute of my day, was finally silent. The integration is the strangest, most beautiful part. I used to think there were two of me: the hard, silent man who paid the bills, and the soft, frightened woman who lived in the dark. But they weren't two people. They were just one person who was suffocating. Now the barriers are gone. When I walk into a meeting, I don't have to lower my voice or square my shoulders. I speak with the resonance I have, lighter and clearer, and people listen. Not because I'm loud, but because I'm present. Chloe comes over for wine on Fridays, and we don't have to whisper about her like she's a ghost. We just talk about work, about dating, about the weird way my hair is curling now that it's past my shoulders. The secret shame has evaporated, leaving only the mundane, wonderful reality of existing. I still think about the accident of the spray. It's a bizarre origin story, a chemical prank that rewrote my genetic destiny. Sometimes, late at night, I feel a flash of anger at the violation of it, the lack of consent in those first few weeks. It was a theft of choice. But mostly, looking back at the gray, numb existence I was dragging myself through, I just feel a complicated relief. It was a terrifying, reckless catalyst, but it saved me from a slow death by repression. I was waiting for permission to exist, paralyzed by the fear of blowing up my life. The universe, in its chaotic, messy way, decided to stop waiting and just shoved me forward. The fear has been replaced by a quiet, steady maintenance of joy. I stepped out of the shower this morning and wiped the steam from the mirror. I didn't brace myself for the disappointment. I didn't look for the shadow of the jawline I hated or the rough texture of skin that felt wrong. I just saw me. The softness isn't a defect anymore. It's the point. My breasts, still tender but settling into their shape, are just part of the silhouette. My eyes are bright, clear, framed by lashes that I darken with mascara simply because I like the way it looks. I smiled at her, at me. It wasn't a triumphant grin. It was just a recognition. Oh, there you are. I used to think I was losing myself, but I was just shedding a skin that never really fit. The air in the bedroom smells different now. The cloying jasmine and sharp musk are distant memories. It just smells like rain and fresh cotton, clean, unmasked, and entirely my own. Sometimes the worst accidents drive us to the only destination that matters. If you want to hear more stories about finding the truth in unexpected places, subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.